Today I'm speaking with Juliette Powell. She's the author, along with Art Kleiner, of the recently released book, The AI Dilemma: 7 Principles for Responsible Technology. She's an entrepreneur, a technologist, a strategist. She brings together culture, data science and ethics in a really compelling way, both in the way that she presents, but also working with clients as well. She works as a consultant and speaker around topics such as using AI responsibly, which is very topical at the moment, unconscious bias and strategic leadership as well. So Juliette, welcome.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm so pleased to be here with you.
And it's great to connect. So you're in New York at the moment. I'm in Melbourne, Australia. So we are on other sides of the planet. I'm starting my day. You're completing your day. So I appreciate you carving out the time. Congratulations on the book. I think you do a really fantastic job of balancing the risks and benefits of AI while also providing some very practical ways and frameworks about thinking about, particularly about managing the risks associated with it. I'm just interested, obviously it's a very topical thing at the moment, but what drew you into the world of AI in the first place?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that most of our modern world is underpinned by AI, whether we're aware of it or not. And that's been the case for a very long time. I think most people are kind of coming face to face with that fact through generative AI and, the headlines that are appearing every day all over the world. As far as I'm concerned, I really got attracted to understanding the social graph. First and foremost, that was back in probably 2000, I'd say 2004 to 2008. I spent a lot of time in seeing how we all influence each other for the good, the bad, and the ugly, and how AI just amplifies that. So my real journey in AI began after I worked with Intel Labs. We were mapping the personal data ecosystem on a global level and realizing that where you live in the world, how much access you have to basic things like infrastructure, like electricity as much as internet, are going to determine how much access you have to making decisions that are related to shaping this technology. And through that process with Intel Labs, I realized that most of the people that I spoke with, and this was truly all over the world, for-profit, nonprofit, varying industries across the board, I, irresponsive of all of it, very, very few people actually looked like me, whether we were talking about data scientists, computer engineers, or AI specialists. And I started to wonder why. And then I looked a little bit closer at my own history. To tell you the truth, I was a coder when I was a kid. And while I was still in high school, my math teacher kind of picked me up and said, "Hey, you should go to this advanced class over there. They're giving it at the university. What do you think?" And I thought, "Oh, this is a fantastic opportunity." And I remember getting to the sub basement of Concordia University in Montreal, and it was dust filled. It was dark. It was all male. I was really excited about the prospect of, one day becoming Juliette Bond. But at the same time, yeah, I just felt like the space, the learning environment was not built for me. And so I ended up taking a completely different direction in my own career. But I still think that, for the most part, we are beginning to take context into account when we look at things like all things STEM, if you will. But there's still a lot of work to do, I think, to make everybody feel like they can be part of not just the problem, but the solution. So I'd love to see, more women in tech, but ultimately for me it was seeing that gap and wondering what I might be able to do. Could I add value? That's the big exploration for all of us in leadership, right?
So, Juliet, a great observation there around the impact that a teacher can have, right? Of just picking out some talent in someone, identifying that that's something that you can do. But then kind of, it's very disappointing to then hear the experience of turning up in an environment that's really not welcoming, not exciting. I'm not sure what it is about mathematics and computers that we decide that as low underground as possible is the best place to teach people. get them away from natural light, whatever you can. But hopefully we're starting to shift that a little bit. And I certainly the work that you're doing is helping to encourage that as well. And we'll talk about some of that bias. I think particularly AI can really amplify that, right? So we'll come back to that as well. But when you talk in the book about the AI dilemma, can you just talk to us about what is that dilemma?
The AI dilemma is very straightforward, and I think we can all relate to it in some way in our lives. That in the wrong hands, it can be dangerous. And we see headlines about this every single day. In the right hands, it has the potential to be beneficial for the majority of people on the planet. And I think that we who live in G8 countries are those that have it first. And essentially, we have the opportunity to shape it in a way that will be beneficial, but it will take all of us, not just some of us.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I suspect I know the answer to this question, but can't we just trust technology firms to do the right thing here?
I love how you giggled in the middle of your own question. I mean, it's very difficult to trust a person, let alone an entity that says, please regulate us, please, please regulate us. And oh, wait, 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 I'll show you how to regulate it. So, yeah, I think that governments, organizations across the board are trying to figure out how to deal with impending regulation that's coming out of the EU, for example, the Artificial Intelligence Act, which clearly will have an impact on all of us, just as GDPR has. But at the same time, I think that many people and organizations, as well as governments, are trying to figure out how to self-regulate. In fact, my book, The AI Dilemma, is based on my dissertation at Columbia University, which is on the limits and possibilities of self-regulation in AI. And when I think about self-regulation, it's it's about taking responsibility for ourselves as users, as individual users, but also in terms of organizations that are deploying the technology internally and affecting users externally. So there's this larger implication. And I also believe in the social contract, that we owe it to ourselves to pay attention. And if we are going to make an entity public, an IPO, a public organization, then they're meant to serve the public, or else there's a
Mm.
problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, if I look at government regulation, and we might return to that theme because even where I'm based in Australia, they're looking at regulation around uh, basically forcing organisations to train people up in new technology that's likely to impact their jobs. So very sort of heavy-handed regulation there around that, which is really around securing employment, I think, is the focus of that. But in the book, you talk about the Apex benchmark as one way of trying to get our heads around, trying to control this or at least have some insight there. Can you just talk us through that and what that looks like?
So the Apex benchmark is a model that I came up with in looking at all of the pressures that an organization goes through, from its inception to the point where it scales and becomes a more public company. And I think that most of us, and you say this often in your podcast, which I really appreciate, Andrew, is this idea as leaders. We generally get into leadership to have a positive impact on the world. We generally start companies because we want to have a positive impact on the world. And I don't think that that changes as form the organization and bring in your first group of employees. There's an excitement, there's a joie de vivre, which is why most people wear multiple hats and you're willing to do everything and give up a whole lot of personal life to be able to bring this organization to the next level, to be able to create products and services that serve actual people or businesses. And I think as you scale, it takes a very different type of leadership. And we've seen this, not just in big tech, but across different different categories of organizations where when you scale, you need to be able to do things a certain way for people to be able to trust you. You need to have a board, you need more supervision, right? There are just many legal entities that come into play, but also as you're scaling, you have to hire a lot more people. And it's much more difficult as a leader to keep your eye on every single person. In a startup, it's fairly easy. You can see everybody, they're mostly in the same building, but as you scale, things get large and people have to learn how to manage. And as you manage, you also have to manage your competition. You have to manage all of the internal policies that now have to not just be alive and well in the company, but they have to be enforced, right? You need watchdogs at every level. And I think that as you scale, especially when you're a technology company, it becomes clear that the biggest contracts that you can possibly get are governmental contracts. And now we're not just talking about millions of dollars. We're talking about, especially in the United States, we're talking about billions of dollars, right? And that just ups the competition, not just internally, but externally with other providers, where you want to be the first one. You want to be the one that has the best competition, the best product, the best delivery for the best price. And to be able to do that, you have to make compromises, like in any organization. But when you are looking at, again, why did you start the company? What was the impetus? It often shifts to be able to fulfill all of these different competitive values. And these competitive values mean that level of self-regulation can start to change, right? All of a sudden, money becomes more important. All of a sudden, getting those government contracts become important. All of a sudden, undercutting your competition becomes all the more important. And you tend to erode that ability to self-regulate in the way that you would have originally. And I think that the Apex benchmark just really underscores this idea that as you look at the competitive landscape, it's going to be the top dog that tends to be the first mover, and then everybody else moves in that direction. There are some cases where you have disruptors. For example, OpenAI. For the longest time, many really looked at AI as being led by organizations like Google, Alphabet, Amazon, right? Microsoft to a certain extent. And all of a sudden, you've got this organization that most people on the planet had never heard of, OpenAI, that did the first move in generative AI. They launched almost exactly 1 year ago. And of course, all other organizations were kind of taken aback, even if they were considered the leaders in AI. And as a result, they had to follow suit, even if they weren't ready, even if they were doing a different type of calculus of intentional risk. And when I talk about that, I specifically mean a company like Google Alphabet has billions of users. Their reputation is worth far more than an unknown entity like OpenAI. So OpenAI had a lot less to lose by being the first to market, right? Google wanted to do it right, and so they had the technology, but they held back and they wanted to just do it with much smaller groups to be able to test out the technology, see how people use it. I think it was a much safer framework. And at the same time, when they did follow the Apex benchmark and followed the leader, they stumbled. They stumbled the first time that they tried to release BARD. They stumbled a number of times since then. And sadly, that is what the Apex benchmark looks like.
Yeah, and what I find, I absolutely agree. I was amazed at how quickly a string of large organizations released a generative AI product very quickly, and it did seem, just even as a casual observer like me, it seemed very rushed. And incredible for you to mention, ChatGPT about a year old, really, and the impact that that's had just in people's awareness. My wife is a school nurse, and she uses ChatGPT to help craft communications to parents. And I just think, I wouldn't have necessarily seen that as the place that AI would end up. But it seems like AI is everywhere. I look at my washing machine at home and it proudly declares that it's got AI in it. So I'm not sure exactly what it's doing with my clothes while it's processing them. But it's,
So much what it's doing with your clothes, it's paying attention to what you're doing.
Well, exactly. One of the first things it asked was to connect to the internet. And I'm going, why do you need to connect to the internet? And it proudly declared that I could start my washing remotely. I have that use case seems very flimsy. I'm not sure of any time that I want to just start my washing machine from 100 miles away. But you talk in the book about triple A systems. And I think that's a great way of because I think part of the confusion is that there's not really, we lump a whole lot of things together in technologies and applications. But you talk about this AAA systems. Can you just talk us through those? So the algorithmic, autonomous and automated, and just maybe how that helps us to understand AI?
Again, I think that most people are learning more and more to what extent AI is just such a part of our modern life. But ultimately, I think people are more aware of algorithms just because, again, there have been, so many different issues with everything from revenge porn to not being able to get a job or an apartment or even the partner that you want because the algorithm decided that you weren't necessarily worthy, credit score issues, especially here in the US. All of those things are very much algorithmic. I think when we talk about automation, people start thinking about their jobs. Could my job be automated? Does that mean that, I'm now useless, that I can retire? Or if I can't afford to retire, what do I do? There are many, many questions around that. And I also think that many people are thinking about things like self-driving cars. Here in the United States, for example, we've been testing that for a while, but all of a sudden they're on the streets in places like Arizona and San Francisco, where I just got back from, by the way. And I was very disappointed that I was not offered a robo taxi because I wanted to try it. I wanted to see what it was in situ as opposed to just studying the stuff from afar. The people that I did see riding robo taxis was the equivalent of just getting into a taxi.
Mm.
They literally had already pre-ordered the thing. They sat down, they got on their phone, and then they got to destination. That was it. There was no real fear or issue around it. I think where there's fear or issue is knowing that there have been so many accidents because there are just so many unintended negative consequences that we haven't thought about in all AAA systems.
Mm.
So not just the ones that I mentioned as examples, but all of the ones that we don't necessarily think about from a day-to-day basis that are, again, just part of our lives.
Mm.
Just, again, your washing machine, my refrigerator, all of it.
Yeah, and I think, when it's interesting when they're talking about self-driving cars, part of the issue is poor line marking on roads or poor signage, and so the roads aren't necessarily set up for automated vehicles to be going around on. It'd be fair to say that I imagine now that the average automated vehicle is probably better than the average driver, or at least on par. But absolutely, if one of those cars hits a pedestrian, it doesn't just make the news in the US or wherever it happened, it makes the news globally. Whereas, pedestrians are struck by vehicles every minute of every day around the world. But there is something that we find unnerving about the loss of control, I think, or that and you write, the preface to the book, you talk about like this loss of humanity and sort of share a personal story around that. But that we do have this fear, right, that AI is going to make decisions that we don't like, and that we then don't have. So the bank refuses my home loan using an algorithm. They've found something there. I ask the question, why did you refuse it? They may not even be able to answer that question. Like they may not know. It's just purely driven by that. So how do we avoid AI having that dehumanizing impact on us as a society and in our organizations as well?
Well, you mentioned the word control, and that is a central theme to the book. And I do believe that biologically, we all crave control. We all have this need to make decisions that have an impact on our lives and on those that we love. And with our technologies, traditionally, we've always felt more in control, right? This idea of a car, at least in the United States, is equivalent to the idea of freedom, right? You get a car, you get freedom. You attain a certain age, and you have the control that you didn't necessarily have as a child to make decisions that can stick and that you can be accountable for. And at the same time, our technology driven by AI, for instance, our phones, our laptops, all of it often give us the illusion of control. So when you press buy on Amazon and all you have to do is press a button, or you go through the subway and you don't really have to stop, you can just swipe through, all of these things feel like it makes our life easier. If we are using Waze, for example, we get there and we think that it's faster because the system has told us so. Um, and I had to really investigate whether that was true for me and also true for society. So I didn't just base myself on what I thought. I went to see multiple specialists, and one lady in particular, Sheena Iyengar, who's at Columbia Business School here in New York, really spent her life studying this idea of control. And she's an extraordinary woman. She lost her eyesight, and as a result, when she talks about control, I feel like she had a drive to
Mm.
better understand this biological need for control. And essentially the conversation that we had, her research reinforced mine and vice versa. This idea that when you're truly in control, it means that you're making a cost benefit analysis. You're really weighing, you're taking the time to make a judgment, to weigh the pros and cons of a decision. When you're just pressing that button on Amazon to buy something, you're not deliberating, you're not necessarily thinking about it, right? It's easy, it's frictionless. And our technology, our AI technology is designed to be as frictionless as possible, to bring a customer from the moment of discovery of the thing that they're looking for all the way through to the buy button, right? And it takes seconds. But that's to eliminate that deliberation that's needed to truly make a decision that allows us the control that we seek. And so I think part of the larger issue around artificial intelligence is we have technological complacency where we think that our technology is smarter than us, whether we use the marketing term artificial intelligence or talk about neural networks or machine learning. Ultimately, we think that it's going to make better decisions than us, whether we think about it or not. Innately, we seem to feel that way based on our behavior on one end. And on the other end, we don't necessarily take into account that the whole goal of all of our free systems and our free apps is to monetize,
Mm.
right? These are businesses running these things. And so, when what is the end goal of any kind of app? It's to make us do something that will benefit the corporation. And if it benefits us, great. But ultimately, it does not necessarily benefit our need for control. And I think that we need to disambiguate those two ideas.
Yeah, and this idea that a product that you're not paying for is you're not the customer, right? So I think about ChatGPT. I'm just using the free version at the moment, so I'm not the customer here. I'm a data source, I imagine, that's feeding into things, and it is interesting how you have to. I find myself having to hold back from feeding in data that might be commercially confident or that might be personal that I don't want shared with other people. And I'm sure there's a box I've ticked somewhere allowing all of that, but I don't really recall doing it. I must have skipped past that
So
part.
you're practicing self-regulation.
Yeah, occasionally, Juliet, at my best, on my best days, I practice self-regulation. It comes occasionally, but I think it is that thing of most of the time, like that buy button example is a great one. So we might say there was, I think it was Tesla were looking at a model where basically the vehicle could purchase its own tires. When it's time to purchase new tires, you just accesses your account, takes the money out, and arranges for the new tires to be fitted. And one of the comments under that was, I would be so angry if my car ordered tires without letting me know. And it's just interesting that like it's meant to be an efficiency thing and an ease of use, but there's such a fine line between that frictionless and suddenly unintended consequences or a painful result that we go, wow, I've just had $1,000 debited out of my account and I didn't see it coming. So it's an interesting line. And I guess when you're looking at or because you consult with organisations, you work with a range of people. Obviously, you're working in the tertiary the university sector as well. If a leader was looking at trying to, because I think I speak with a lot of leaders now that are navigating, well, we need to introduce AI. We need to allow our workers to have access to this. Often knowledge workers, they might be processing a whole lot of documents or whatever else it is. So they've seen an opportunity, but they really just don't know where to start. What's your advice to leaders and organizations that are looking at just trying to introduce AI in some kind of responsible way?
First and foremost, I think that a governance around AI is really mandatory for any organization that's using it internally as well as externally. So guidelines that are driven by the culture of the organization, why the organization was formed, what's its goal. Ultimately, all of those things need to be taken into account. And I think that because it's a fairly new technology for most people, actually allowing employees to weigh in, and it shouldn't just be the C-suite. It should be everyone that has a voice in the organization should be able to weigh in on what they think is a good use case for AI and what is not. And that way you get a lot more buy-in. It's going to take you a longer time to deliberate and figure out what that governance structure should be around artificial intelligence, but it will be better for more people. And once you do have that, I think at the end of it, one of the key questions that leaders and individuals need to ask themselves is, what am I not willing to do to make a buck? It's something that I think most of us don't necessarily ask. It's kind of like asking, what is your mission in life? Well, nobody's asked me that recently, but I'm very glad somebody did ask me when I was a teenager. And that mission has led me, like, throughout my career, throughout my personal life, just what kind of a person do I want to become? And as a leader, you now have access to all of this technology at the end of your fingertips, all of this power, all of this responsibility. So what is it that we as an organization want to do with it, and what limits do we put on it and ourselves? And I think that that conversation is really, really key, because if your personal answer does not match your organization's, there's a really good chance that you shouldn't be in that organization, and that you should go to an organization whose values do match with yours, because of the power involved with artificial intelligence. So those two things I think are really, really important. And that creative friction is our last chapter in the book. Bringing in more people. If you're deploying AI outside of the organization, I think bringing in your population of interest, the people that your technology is targeting, to have them come in and help you imagine not just all the positive things that could happen, but what are some of the harms that you might not have anticipated? And if you can bring the people in to have that conversation before you even design the systems, that means that you're going to design better systems for more people. Have them come in again as you're testing out the systems before you deploy at scale. And then once the stuff has been deployed, again, keep doing those positive feedback loops and incorporating that feedback into your systems. Like when you use ChatGPT, do you bother to give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down? When you do, you're training the system for it to be better for you, but also for all users. And I do think that that feedback is important at all levels.
Yeah, look, it's a really great point. I think, you make a great point in the book about AI really just magnifies the biases that we already have as a society, right? So it just, as technology does generally, it often takes the biases that we already have. If a particular group has an easier run in life, they'll have an even easier run. If another group has a harder run at life, then the obstacles will come up. And it sort of strikes me that an organisation, while it may not be able to prevent that bias in the experimentation phase, they should be able to measure the impacts of it, right? If they're saying that, look, we've applied AI in our recruitment and now suddenly we're only recruiting men and we haven't recruited a woman for the last year, or the system's suggesting that we should do this and there's actually a bias in it, it strikes me that testing, so testing it alongside your existing systems to go, what is this actually generating? Is this magnifying an issue that perhaps we had, but it's making it even worse as well? You mentioned earlier about the European Union, other organisations seeking to regulate risk. And as I said earlier, we talked about, large technology organisations, they're not all evil, right? So you would hope that they would self-regulate to some extent. And I think you gave an example with Google as well, that they are trying to, I would see, trying to do the right thing with this, as OpenAI seems to be as well. How optimistic are you that we can navigate this accelerating adoption of AI and actually end up in a better place as a society? Is that something we should, because I found as I was reading the book, I kind of oscillated between being really excited about the future and feeling quite worried back and forth. So where does how optimistic are you about our ability to actually navigate through this?
Very optimistic in that all of this is driven by people. And I am a big believer in people. I think we have a massive trust issue. We have a trust in our institutions. We have a lack of trust in our governments. We have a lack of trust amongst people. And that is not a problem for technology. That is our problem as humans. And I do think that more and more of us are aware to what extent we as humans are problematic, and that we need to address those things. I'm also very optimistic because Well, I've been working with people like Yoshio Bengio, who is one of the grandfathers of artificial intelligence, and he was one of the proponents, for example, of the open letter that went out last March, inviting the world to essentially pause advanced AI research for 6 months, because he was fearful of what we might do as humans in terms of our technology, and then what our technology might in turn do to us. Well, it's been 7 months now, exactly, because I think it was September 10th that they signed that, or sorry, March 10th that they signed that. And instead of pausing, we accelerated. So I don't think that the pause hypothesis is going to work. His other hypothesis is really scary, but for people that have gone through the big debate that happened during the Cold War, this idea of mutually assured destruction, if that is the card that makes other people around the table say, whoa, 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 wait a minute now. We need to like calm down and start looking at us as a human race as opposed to just different countries and different factions. If we can start thinking that way, then I think that we might be able to turn the curb and make this stuff to the benefit of most people on the planet, as opposed to something that's just going to harm the same old people, same old vulnerable populations over and over and over again. I say this again, having had the incredible privilege of having spoken with him, of we're talking about writing a paper together. On the other hand, I also have my students, and I'm incredibly optimistic for them. Here are students that have been literally finishing their degree. They started their degree in the pandemic, and they're finishing the degree, as the pandemic is ending, but with all of the issues that came from self-isolation and quarantine and having to wear masks and not being able to touch and interact with people beyond through technology. And so for them, AI, and especially generative AI, is a tool with which they are really looking for self-care. And I think that a lot of organizations that I'm speaking with understand how important self-care is for employees and are looking at not just experts, but also bringing in AI for that specific purpose. And that's a wonderful thing also for people with Alzheimer's, like older people that don't have the kind of connection that they're used to. Maybe their families don't go visit them, or, the nurses are too busy. Being able to have that interaction, that creative back and forth, the feeling that you're understood. All of us crave that, again, as part of that larger issue of control. And so I think in certain cases, it's really, really beneficial to specific groups. So if we can get in line and decide, is this technology meant for the technological race or to support the human race? Is this technology meant to support the human race, or is it the arms race? We have to make those decisions as a global community.
And I think that's where, and look, that's probably not the term that you describe yourself as, but it's almost having someone like yourself that's an interpreter of sorts between those worlds. Because, like, often think about academics are brilliant at what they do. They're rarely fantastic at explaining it to the average everyday person like myself that might look at it and go, well, I'm okay with technology, but I just don't understand. I don't even know what I don't know, right? So I can be stumbling into this and creating it. So I think one of the things that, I really commend you on in the book is it's really excellent at, I think, interpreting and having an awareness of what's going on the technology side and bringing that to life for someone who might be in a position where they can influence governance, where they can influence the introduction of technology, to be able to say, well, how do we do this in a fair way, in a safe way, that is going to do the right thing by our people. So, I can only commend people to read the book, because I think it really does represent that well. I think if we talk about impacts, I think one of the other impacts is clearly, and we mentioned it earlier, is around employment, jobs and employment. I mentioned, the Australian government. I know other governments have potentially looked at, well, how can we actually ward against this? I think about the screenwriters strike in the US recently. It was a fascinating one. And my understanding of it was part of the condition off the end of that was people declaring where AI is being used in the process. So at least there's an awareness that this is happening. But if I was a screenwriter, I would think AI would be my absolute friend in terms of being able to be far more productive. But it almost seemed like a humans versus AI sort of argument being run there. What's your thinking about jobs, employment, implications of AI in that space?
So, just jumping off your point about the screenwriters, one of my friends is a screenwriter and was part of the, well, first off, he's written two James Bond movies. So he's kind of the upper echelons of screenwriters, if you will, and he's been doing it for a very, very long time. And so I remember when they signed the contract and we were speaking later that afternoon and he was saying, "Oh, I can't believe it." And I said, "What? You signed the contract. Like, is this not a good thing?" And he said, "Well, what they don't understand, they think that we won, but in fact we've lost." And I asked him why. And he said, "Well, because every single time we have signed a contract, a new contract, it has meant that essentially we're creating less and less content because with AI, and also with the platforms, Netflix and Amazon, et cetera, that meant that we needed more and more content, right? More and more distributors, more and more contents, but we don't have necessarily more and more eyeballs. And so when you look at what it takes for Netflix, for example, to say somebody has viewed my movie or viewed my show, it's 1 minute of content. If somebody has viewed 1 minute of content, it's considered to have been viewed, even if it's an hour and a half, 2 hour movie. And as a result, they felt that the reporting was not accurate. And because the reporting isn't accurate, that meant that there was a whole lot of content that nobody was really watching. So within the contract, what they've done is that they've reduced the number of shows for a series, for example. And they've given the option for screenwriters to use AI or not use AI, but the studios can impose it. What that really means is that there will be less work for less people because there's fewer content that will be written. There's little content that's being watched. And therefore, it's going to be the same old that get the contracts to write. And then the newcomers that might have new ideas might be using more and more ChatGPT or other technologies, but then it's the older people, the people in their 60s and 70s, even if they've written, wonderful and cherished television shows and movies that are going to be pushed off because they're not using the technologies. They can't go as fast. And it's, as he would say, it's a mishigosh, which is not a good thing. It does not work well. So again, this is outside of my realm of expertise in terms of whether they got a good deal or not, but this is coming from somebody who knows that world very, very well. On the other hand, my students, again, earlier today, we were talking about their jobs and when they graduate, when they get their masters and their PhDs, what kind of jobs that they're going to be able to get. And so most of them, they're focused on coding and all of a sudden oh my gosh, I don't need to be able to code anymore. And so what kind of jobs? And now they're looking at what the majority of jobs that they might be interested in looking for. And all of a sudden, it's no longer coding, it's being a prompt engineer. Oh, I must train to be a prompt engineer. And so they're very optimistic because they have that flexibility of, oh, well, if it's not this technology, it's that technology, and I'll just adapt. I think older people or people that have been in one job or one role for a very long time are used to doing it a specific way. That flexibility is more challenging. And they say as we get older, our mental flexibility lessens. I'm hoping that that's not true. Especially if you stay active and you stay on top of new technologies and you learn to play and ask questions and get more comfortable. I'm hoping that more people will be able to embrace these new technologies. But if we look at things historically, as you know, right, when there are major shifts in the Industrial Revolution, sure, there were more jobs, but it's not the same people that were fulfilling those new jobs.
Yeah.
And we see the same thing with automation. There are new jobs, but they're not hiring the people that they fired to surveil the technology. They're hiring new people that cost less money. So jobs for whom, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, that's right. And I think thinking about how can you stay up to date, like it's an interesting one talking about your students. I wonder the extent to which someone could be a prompt engineer, for example, as you described it, if they didn't understand the coding. Like there must be points where they could be creating things that are just rubbish or that don't really fit the use case. So it's that extent to which we need people that actually understand the underpinnings of it. I was speaking with some psychologist colleagues and we were talking about the use of AI around counselling, but around kind of the lower end of counselling, without being disparaging to that, but kind of more day-to-day issues and challenges that people might face rather than complex issues. And AI seems like a very logical place for that. It seems like something that can work well for people, and so in some ways it allows us then to help more people and to really focus our skills on the more complex cases is one way of looking at it. But yeah, look, that concentration to fewer people.
And I ask you this, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm genuinely asking you because we know that generative AI hallucinates, right? It invents things. And even on the day-to-day cases, do you trust it to not nudge you towards a negative outcome?
Yeah, no. So no would be the summary, I think, but it is an interesting one. Like I look at it and say, well, ChatGPT is a year old, right? I try to think of other technologies that are 1 year old and what my expectations were. What I do find fascinating is people's, and I know AI predates that, right? But I think people's expectations, like people celebrate when there's a failure. It's like, oh, look how silly this is. And it's like, it's 1 year old. Like what were automobiles like when they were when we were 1 year into them? They were terrible. The wheels were falling off. You couldn't drive them straight. But
You were there, but
yeah, I wasn't there. No, well, when you were talking about aging and mental, capabilities, I felt that that felt a bit personal, Juliette, but that's okay. But that's fine. Look, it's a fascinating one. I think that, I mean, even in that psychological example of then how you navigate it, and I think the extent to which the philosophy I'm using with it in my own work is to use it as a co-pilot. It's something that sits beside me, but it doesn't fly the plane, and that's kind of how I'm treating it for the moment. I think there will be opportunities. I know there was a personal AI app I stumbled across that you can just feed in information about yourself and it will basically parade as you and reply to your emails as you. And you can turn off any reviewing of that. It just sounds like that's a lawsuit and a disaster waiting to happen for the individuals using it. But it's fascinating that some people, that feature must be there, turn off review, because some people go for it. So it's interesting, that range of appetite that people have for the technology and how it might be applied.
date your own generative AI, right? You can also press record on your entire life through Ray-Ban sunglasses that are enabled by Meta technology. They're pendants now. They're always on, recording every moment of your day and synthesizing it so that you can retrieve it at will. This is just the beginning.
It puts a lot more demand on my life being interesting, Juliet. That's the thing that's struggle with. Not sure I want to record 24 hours of my life, but yeah, look, it's fascinating. It's been great speaking with you today, and I appreciate you have lots on. I can highly recommend the book. So, The AI Dilemma: Seven Principles for Responsible Technology. It's on Amazon. I'll post a link to that. But how can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing, Juliet?
Just reach out to me on LinkedIn or visit my site, juliettepowell.com. You can visit our AI advisory. That's at kleinerpowell.com. Just shoot me a message. I'm online. I'm here.
Excellent. Well, we very much appreciate your time. I wish you all the very best with the book and all the other pursuits that you have. I think yeah, you really do span that world really well in terms of being able to explain what this looks like in layman's terms, but also having that understanding and having the connections in that world that you can bridge those two worlds together. So we know what we need to worry about, and we also know how we can perhaps regulate that and make the most out of it as well. So I'm pleased to hear that you're optimistic about the future of this as well, but very much appreciate you taking the time today, Juliet. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And thanks to anybody who's listening. I really appreciate your time. Thanks.